Thank you for the introductions, and I'm generally honored to be here today, especially as someone who's new to the field of autism and to this fascinating research, as well as strong yet warm and welcoming community. As mentioned, I spend a lot of time in drug industry focusing on developing novel drugs, novel molecules to target specific biology and help in pre-identified clinical conditions. Here I will tell you a story of drug repurposing using an older drug that we now see in a new light. And as mentioned, ketamine has been around for a long time and even has been stipulated as treatment of autism. This fairly simple molecule that was first synthesized in the 60s and approved in the early 70s in anesthesia has been around for a long time, and it has actually gained new uses across different fields of medicine, including emergency medicine, critical care, and most recently, psychiatry. It has recently been approved, and based on some seminal work that actually came out of our institution, Mount Sinai, led by Dean Charney, it was shown that ketamine can actually benefit individuals with refractory depression as an add-on treatment to an oral antidepressant. This has opened up the floodgates of not only a lot of interesting research, but also interest that the industry now has in repurposing ketamine in various psychiatric conditions. And just like that, with a simple email that actually came from a patient advocacy group, there was a spark of interest in the ADNP condition. ADNP is an essential gene in not only brain development, but development of many other organs, including heart and kidneys. And children with a mutation in ADNP have a relatively rare neurodevelopmental disorder, which in some cases is also characterized by autism. There's several hundred cases currently known in the US, but it's a very strong, tightly knit community led by ADNP Kids, which is a research foundation supporting research in this arena. One of the parents who had access to an AI tool as part of his professional career searched for ADNP modulators and came across ketamine. Soon enough, they banded together, talked about the possibility of moving this forward, and came to the Seaver Center. We have a very well-developed relationship with many family foundations and advocacy groups, ADNP being one of them. And as we do both preclinical and clinical work in ADNP disorder, it seems like a very natural fit. Obviously, using ketamine, especially in a pediatric indication, is not to be taken lightly. There has been a lot of conflicting reports on the effects that ketamine can have on central nervous system. We looked at the literature and got emboldened by the correlation that seemed to exist between ADNP expression and ketamine treatment, and more specifically, low-dose ketamine treatment that seems to have a neuroprotective effects. Speaking of how this actually works at the cellular and molecular level, the most obvious is the role that ketamine has on NMDA receptors. But if you look at the wealth of the literature around ketamine's effect on the brain, you will see that it affects a number of neurotransmitters, ion channels, and surprisingly, we still don't fully understand the mechanistic implications of using ketamine, after all these years of studying it and using it in literally thousands of patients. So in this particular indication, we have decided to start with a very small study, only 10 individuals, 10 children ages 5 to 12, and to test primarily for the safety, with the hope that we will see an inkling of efficacy, a tiny signal towards the improvement in the symptoms and behavior of the enrolled participants. Obviously, we included a number of exploratory endpoints. The Seaver Center prides itself in being a very research-oriented organization, both in terms of clinical and preclinical research. Some really wonderful work comes from my colleague, Jan Fosfike, who's here in the audience and who has done all the electrophysiological assessments on the study. And we also included a very extensive work in terms of the transcriptome analysis, led by Dr. Breen and others in the center who are focused on a deeper understanding of the gene expression in the context of autism. With that, we have started a study that involved a single dose of ketamine, and it had to be administered in the clinical setting as a relatively long infusion. And this is where you can see how strong the community behind us is. In the midst of the COVID pandemic, we managed to enroll this study in just 9 months and have parents bring their children who are often severely affected and endure a 40-minute infusion. Thankfully, there were no severe adverse effects, and the drug was very well tolerated, and we were able to not only demonstrate the safety of this approach, but also get that preview of potential efficacy. And here I will not take you through the detailed scales. Those of you who are psychologists and psychiatrists in the audience very well understand them. And what I want to point out here is relative variability, but an overwhelming trend towards improvement. So we can see that different participants responded differently in different scales, but overall we feel that there is a trend towards improvement upon the infusion. And the question is, what now? What's our next step? Are we ready to move this drug into a larger study to actually demonstrate on a statistically significant level that giving ketamine to patients with ADNP can actually make a difference in their quality of life? And that's back to Evdokia's reiteration of how important it is that we understand what good life means to patients and their families. One of the big criticisms that I hear from my former colleagues in pharma industry is that it's very difficult to track any improvement in autism. How do you know that you're doing better? What are your endpoints? What are your readouts? How are you going to measure this? We have done, as a field, a tremendous job, I feel, in improving these outcome measures. Not only that do we combine now the patient-reported and the caregiver-reported outcome measures, but we're constantly developing and evolving the clinical endpoints reported by the clinicians themselves, and also developing the composite instruments that take all of these aspects into the consideration and present them as an objective, quantifiable outcome. And lastly, but importantly, there is an increasingly high number of exploratory endpoints that are gaining traction that are completely objective, such as aforementioned electrophysiological readouts. One of the readouts that I would like to point out is a relatively old scale, again, clinical global impression scale that can measure both the general degree of wellness of a patient as seen by the treating physician, but also the improvement. This is a simple 7-point scale that gives you a sense of how well the patient is doing. And Dr. Kalvzan and others in the center have done tremendous work to adjust and adapt this scale for specifically children and adults with neurodevelopmental disorders. And again, to echo the point that was made, I think, throughout the morning, we sort of have to stop thinking of autism and start thinking about each individual patient in the context of their functionalities and their overall sense of well-being, and measure that, because that is the outcome that will resonate with the community. It will resonate with industry that's to support the new treatments and not just the pharmacological treatments, and also with social services that are required in this space. In terms of the future directions, we are very excited to move forward with studying ketamine in the ADNP population and hopefully beyond in other populations characterized by autism and neurodevelopmental delays. We have a tentative design that has been extensively discussed with the FDA, and it's driven towards measuring as many meaningful endpoints as possible. It's a typical crossover design where you treat the patients with the drug and then you don't, and vice versa, trying to estimate the effects in the entire population of the study, and also reduce the burden on the participating families. We have some interested pharma partners that we're currently discussing this with, and I'm very hopeful that we will launch the next trial and learn more about how to use ketamine in this population, because I think it will have ramifications beyond just this specific population and this specific drug. It will be an example of how we should look across the conditions and across the drugs that we already have, and think about using them to alleviate the symptoms and improve life. In summary, this is a very complex and underserved condition. We will need a lot more work to really understand it and to understand the mechanism of ketamine, but we are hopeful that the future studies will help us elucidate some of these mechanisms and help us bring novel treatment options to the autism community. I will not read all the names. I will just mention that I wish Alex was here today, Dr. Collison, who was the PI on the study and also clinical leader of the center, as well as Joseph Boxbaum, who has fearlessly led the center for the past 20-some years. I want to thank all my colleagues, both on preclinical, clinical, and support service side. We are a very tightly knit organization and love working together. I want to give special thanks to the ADNP kids, and who not only supported this research in terms of their participation and interest, but they also funded the study. And I want to thank you all for your attention and for your interest in our work.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great talk. So I'm no expert in ADNP syndrome, but just in my cursory look at the literature, I know there are some urinary tract abnormalities like vesicoureteral reflux and like recurrent UTIs, things like that. And so with ketamine, especially over like longer courses, having some potential like urinary toxicity, things like that. Is there any worry there about that being a potential like dose limiting or course limiting side effect? And are you worried about that in your longer course trials?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of worry. As I mentioned, there is other deficits that are part of the ADNP clinical presentation, and ketamine does have a safety profile that's far from innocuous. So we are very well aware of potential dangers. We are also very well aware of the fact that this is a controlled substance with potential addiction issues and other effects that are not desirable. But again, that's the point of precision medicine approach. Try to find the right treatment for the right symptoms in the right patient, and the question of dosing is obviously critical. But thank you for raising that point. It's a very valid one.
Thank you for that really interesting presentation. I know there's a lot of enthusiasm and curiosity in the autism community about ketamine. Could you talk a little bit about the process of moving from a study in a single gene form of autism to the broader autism community or idiopathic autism?
Absolutely. So our focus on the monogenic forms of autism is basically an attempt to simplify and look at a population that's more uniform than the population with general autism. And as stated in the previous presentations, if you look at autism at large, it's hundreds and hundreds of genes, it's all sorts of behavioral changes, and obviously very different presentation across the spectrum. So focusing on the single population will give us that entryway, and we would look at this in the context of drug development as a rare disease indication. Moving forward, we would like to understand the mechanism and the impact on the discrete aspects of the behavior and discrete biomarkers, such as electrophysiological biomarkers, molecular biomarkers, as much as possible in the studies in the ADNP population, to be able to extrapolate and stratify a larger population for the future studies. So simplistically, if we see that ketamine has very good impact on anxiety in the ADNP population, there is a variety of other neurodevelopmental disorders that fall under or outside of the umbrella of autism that would also benefit from this kind of effect. So then we would stratify for that and look at the anxiety-related readouts in the larger population. Does that answer the question? Okay. Yes.
Hi, thank you. It's so interesting. My daughter starts a ketamine trial next week. She has autism. She's 22. And the trial is focused on managing her anxiety and some trauma that she's experienced in her life. So I'm so excited about your work and wondering, there's kind of a translational research event happening right now as ketamine is available and being ordered, and autism is not a rule out for ketamine as a treatment. Are you aware of studies or work that's ongoing right now for ketamine in the wild is kind of how I think about it, as people with autism are being prescribed this currently?
Well, as with any approved drug, FDA-approved drug, the physicians have the ability to prescribe it off-label, meaning not for the condition that it was indicated for, but for alternative conditions. And we are very well aware of a number of individuals with autism and neurodevelopmental disorders at large being treated with ketamine. This leads to personal benefit, and obviously patients who stay on ketamine probably benefit from it greatly. However, it doesn't help us as a community to better understand and move this drug forward in terms of the regulatory approvals and reimbursements, which are not maybe significant at the personal level, but definitely at the population level and the healthcare system level. So we're really hopeful that additional clinical trials, placebo-controlled trials, will demonstrate the efficacy of ketamine, or at least lead us towards the direction of population in which this efficacy can be demonstrated, so that we can put ketamine on the map in the context of autism and neurodevelopmental delays.
Dr. Kostic, hey, over here. I saw you started with infusions, and the next study will be injections. How hard or easy would it be to go to something a little bit easier to administer on a regular basis, like oral or the nasal spray? Is that feasible?
It's definitely feasible. I mentioned before the use in treatment-refractory depression. The drug that's currently marketed by Janssen is actually an intranasal spray, which is relatively easy to administer. That being said, it's still supposed to be administered in the clinical setting under the supervision of a physician. So we're definitely moving towards the formulations that would be easier to administer, especially in this very sensory-sensitive population. But the question of whether it will be administrable at home or in the clinical setting obviously remains to be discussed with the regulatory agencies, and it has very significant ramifications.
I can be quick. Thank you for your excellent presentation. On your randomized controlled crossover trial that you're planning, I'm wondering if there will be any kind of follow-up for those participants 6 months, a year after the trial.
Most likely remotely, and the beauty of studying a rare disorder is that the community is so small, and the center that specializes in the disorders such as ADNP has a lot of historic data on the participants, most likely, as well as the follow-on data. So We have characterized a number of individuals with ADNP syndrome as part of our effort to better understand this condition and its relationship to autism, which is our primary mission. And I predict that we'll definitely follow up and have some long-term outcome data. Obviously, it will not be under the coverage of the drug, but it would give you some sense of any potential side effects, complications, and it remains to also be included in any future drug development plans that we or other teams may have around this molecule. All good? Well, thank you very much.